Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan. I am a writer and a storyteller. I hope you enjoy the journey I've written for you today. So get cozy and relax. The basement of the Metropolitan Museum always smelled the same, like dust, old paper, and time that had stopped moving. My broom moved rhythmically across the concrete floor, pushing a pile of gray lint and lost ticket stubs, the only sound in the massive, echoing underground archive. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, and while the city above was sleeping or partying, I was down here cleaning up after history. Being a janitor isn't glamorous. You're invisible. You walk past million-dollar paintings and gold statues, but people look right through you like you're part of the wallpaper. I didn't mind the quiet, though. It was better than the noise of my tiny apartment in Queens, where the radiator clanked all night and the sirens never stopped. I pushed the broom under a heavy oak cabinet that looked like it hadn't been moved since the 1920s, expecting just more dust bunnies. Instead, the bristles hit something heavy. Clink. A metallic sound, dull and solid, not like a coin or a soda can. Bending down, I reached into the shadows, my fingers brushing against cold, rough metal. I pulled it out. It was a key, but not a normal key. It was massive, made of iron that was pitted with rust, heavy as a hammer in my hand. It looked medieval, like something that belonged to a dungeon gate, not a museum archive. There was no tag on it, no barcode, no "Do Not Touch" sticker. Just a simple, crude iron bow and a jagged, complex bit that looked like teeth. Weird, I whispered to myself, wiping the grime off on my work pants. I should have turned it in to Lost and Found. That was the rule. But holding it felt strange. It felt warm. Not warm like it had been in the sun, but warm like it was alive, humming with a faint vibration that tickled my palm. I slipped it into my pocket, telling myself I'd hand it over to the shift supervisor in the morning. I finished my rounds, the heavy iron weight bumping against my thigh with every step, a constant reminder of the secret in my pocket. At 6 a.m. I clocked out, walking into the gray dawn of New York City. The subway ride home was the usual misery. Crowded, smelling of wet wool and coffee. Standing by the door of my apartment building, I fumbled for my keys, exhausted and ready to collapse. My hand brushed the big iron key first. Just for a joke, a stupid, tired thought, I pulled it out. My apartment door had a modern deadbolt, a shiny brass slit that was way too small for this rusty monster. "Open sesame," I muttered, jamming the iron tip against the lock. It didn't bounce off. The metal seemed to soften, to shrink, sliding into the keyhole like it was made of liquid mercury. I turned it. Click. The door swung open. But I wasn't looking at my messy living room. I was looking at a beach. A white, sandy beach with turquoise water and a sun that was high in the sky. The air hitting my face wasn't the stale, garbage-scented breeze of a New York hallway. It was hot, humid, and smelled like pure salt. Standing there, Clutching the brass doorknob of my apartment, my brain refused to process the data. One foot was on the dirty linoleum of Queens. The other was sinking into powdery white sand. "This is a dream," I whispered, the words lost in the sound of crashing waves. But dreams don't feel this real. I stepped through. The door slammed shut behind me, not attached to a wall, not attached to a building, just a freestanding rectangle of wood standing upright in the sand like a surrealist sculpture. I walked around it. From the back, it was just raw wood, weathered and ordinary. From the front, it was my apartment door, peeling paint and all. I was standing on a beach in the Caribbean? The Maldives? I looked at my watch. 6:30 a.m. The sun here was blazing high noon. I looked at the rusty iron key in my hand. It was vibrating again, a low, thrumming pulse against my skin. "You did this," I said to the metal. It wasn't a master key for doors. It was a master key for geography. I had been thinking about warmth, about the postcard taped to the locker room wall at work, and the key had listened. I had to test it. I had to know if I was crazy. I shoved the key back into the lock of the freestanding door, closing my eyes tight. Home, I thought, picturing my messy couch, the stack of unpaid bills, the cracking plaster ceiling. I turned the iron relic. Click. The heavy latch slid back. Opening the door, the bright sun vanished, replaced by the dim yellow gloom of my hallway. I stepped back onto the linoleum, the smell of floor wax greeting me like an old friend. I was back. But I wasn't the same janitor who left. I looked at the key, really looked at it this time. I wasn't just a guy with a broom anymore. I was a ghost. I was a god. And the world was about to get a lot smaller. Being a tourist was fun for about 5 minutes, but staring at the water stains on my ceiling, the reality of my bank account hit me harder than a hangover. I had $12 to my name until Friday. The key wasn't just a travel agent, it was a golden ticket. I didn't pick a bank in New York because it was too close and too risky. Instead, I remembered a documentary I saw about the Bank of England, about the gold bars stacked like bricks in a basement deeper than the subway. Standing in front of my bathroom door, the chipped white paint looking pathetic, I gripped the iron key tight. I closed my eyes. I didn't know the layout, so I focused on the concept, picturing the vault, the cold air, and the quiet. The key fought me for a second, the iron heating up in my palm like it was warning me. But then the lock turned. It felt heavy, like I was moving tumblers made of lead. Pushing the door open, the humidity of the bathroom vanished instantly, replaced by air so cold and dry it stung my throat. I wasn't looking at my shower curtain anymore. I was standing inside a room of polished steel and concrete, where the silence was absolute. No traffic and no sirens. Just the hum of high-voltage security systems that, miraculously, hadn't triggered yet. And there, on wooden pallets, sat the gold. Rows of it. I didn't take the gold because gold is heavy and makes you walk slow. I went for the cages on the side. the ones filled with bundles of currency wrapped in plastic. Pounds, euros, dollars. I grabbed 2 thick bricks of $100 bills, shoving them into the pockets of my work jacket. It was too easy. It felt like cheating gravity. I stepped back through the bathroom door, pulling it shut just as a red laser grid swept across the spot where I had been standing. Back in Queens, I threw the money on my bed. $20,000 in 10 seconds. I wasn't a janitor anymore. I was a ghost in the machine. 2 weeks of living like a king changes a man, makes you sloppy and blind to the risks. I wasn't cleaning floors anymore. I was eating steak in Paris for lunch and watching the sunset in Tokyo for dinner, all without ever buying a plane ticket. The money was infinite, but the thrill was fading. And boredom is a dangerous thing when you have a magic key in your pocket. Standing in front of a closet door in a penthouse suite in Dubai, the iron relic felt heavy in my hand, vibrating with a potential that scared me. The desire wasn't for cash this time. It was for knowledge. I wanted to see something real, something hidden from the rest of the world. "Show me the secrets," I whispered to the metal, closing my eyes and picturing the darkest, most secure place on earth. The key got hot, scalding hot, burning my fingers like a branding iron, but I didn't let go. I turned it. The door didn't open into a vault or a palace. It swung open into a cold, concrete room, smelling of sterile air and burnt coffee. It looked like an office, but the walls were covered in digital maps. Maps with red glowing dots moving in real time. In the center of the room, 5 men in gray suits stopped talking mid-sentence and turned to look at me. They weren't bankers. They were intelligence. One of them, a man with a jagged scar running down his cheek, reached for a weapon under his jacket before he even shouted. "Breach! Sector 4!" he yelled, his voice echoing off the steel walls. The door slammed shut under my grip just as a bullet splintered the wood frame inches from my face, the sound of the gunshot muffled by the closing portal. I fell back onto the plush carpet of the hotel, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I had poked the bear, and now the bear knew my face. Paranoia is a quiet noise that never stops humming in your ears. Back in the apartment in Queens, the silence felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. Packing a bag felt stupid because I could go anywhere in the world in 1 second. But old habits die hard, and I needed clean socks. The iron key sat on the kitchen counter, looking innocent. Just a rusty piece of metal that had ruined my life in less than a minute. "They saw your face," I whispered to the empty room, my hands shaking as I zipped up the duffel bag. The government doesn't just forget when a guy pops out of a closet in their secret bunker. They have cameras, facial recognition, and satellites that can read a license plate from space. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was a target painted in neon red. The sound came from the hallway, a heavy, rhythmic thudding of boots on the stairs that vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't the police. Police knock. These guys moved with the heavy, confident weight of people who own the building, the street, and the law. Peeking through the peephole, the fisheye lens showed 3 men in tactical gear. Not gray suits this time, but black armor and helmets with no faces. "Open up," a voice boomed, sounding digital and terrifying. They didn't wait for an answer. The wood frame of the door splintered with a deafening crack as a battering ram hit the lock. They weren't here to arrest me. They were here to erase me. Scrambling backward, I grabbed the key off the counter, nearly dropping it on the linoleum floor. The front door was buckling, hinges screaming as the wood gave way under the assault. There was only one exit left. I lunged for the bathroom door, jamming the iron key into the cheap brass knob with trembling fingers. "Think, think, think," I yelled at myself, my mind racing through a Rolodex of places. London, Tokyo, the moon. But fear made everything blank. The front door crashed open, boots stomping into the living room, laser sights sweeping across the wall. I twisted the key blindly, picturing the only place that felt safe, the only place loud enough to hide the sound of my screaming heart. The bathroom door swung open, not into a shower, but into the roar of a subway tunnel. I jumped. Landing on the concrete catwalk, the air was thick with steel dust and the ear-splitting screech of metal on metal. The bathroom door, the portal, slammed shut behind me and vanished instantly, leaving nothing but a blank, soot-stained wall in the dark tunnel. Below me, the third rail hummed with lethal voltage, and the lights of an oncoming train cut through the gloom like angry eyes. I pressed my back against the cold, damp tiles, my chest heaving, listening to the train roar past inches from my nose. It was the number 7 line, rattling toward Manhattan, oblivious to the man shivering in the dark. I checked my pockets frantically. The key was still there, burning hot against my thigh, a radioactive reminder that I wasn't safe anywhere. Not here, not in Queens, not on this planet. Scrambling along the maintenance path, the rats scattering under my boots, I realized the terrifying truth. They hadn't just found my apartment by luck. They tracked the opening. Every time I turned that key, it must set off an alarm on some government dashboard. A spike in energy that painted a target on my back. "Keep moving," I muttered, wiping the sweat and grime from my forehead. If I stayed in one spot, they would box me in. I needed to be erratic. I needed to be impossible to predict. I saw a rusted service door up ahead with a sign that said, "Danger, high voltage." It didn't matter what was behind it physically. It only mattered where I wanted it to go. I couldn't go back to the apartment, and I couldn't go to the bank. I needed chaos. I grabbed the handle, the iron key sliding into the lock with a familiar, heavy clunk. I didn't think of a quiet beach this time. I thought of noise. I thought of a crowd so dense that 5 guys in tactical gear would never find me. "Shibuya," I whispered, turning the metal hard to the right. The door swung open, and the damp tunnel air was instantly blasted away by neon light and the roar of 1,000,000 people. I stepped through, stumbling onto the rainy pavement of a Tokyo alleyway. The door clicked shut behind me, turning back into the rear exit of a noodle shop. I pulled my hood up, merging into the sea of umbrellas. Just another face in the crowd of 30 million people. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. I had bought myself an hour, maybe 2, but the hunt was on. The rain in Tokyo doesn't wash things clean. It just makes the neon lights bleed onto the pavement like melted crayons. Walking through the crush of Shibuya Crossing, surrounded by 1,000 umbrellas, I kept my head down, pulling the collar of my jacket tight against the chill. It was 8 p.m. here, the city alive and screaming with energy, a perfect chaotic shield for a man trying to disappear. I ducked into a narrow side street lined with vending machines and noodle bars, the smell of broth and exhaust fumes thick in the air. I thought I was clever. I thought jumping halfway across the planet in a split second would buy me days of silence. But looking at the reflection in a dark shop window, my heart stopped. The crowd behind me was moving, a blur of commuters and tourists. But one figure wasn't moving. A man in a gray raincoat was standing perfectly still in the middle of the river of people, staring directly at the back of my head. He didn't have a gun out, and he wasn't wearing tactical gear. But the look in his eyes was colder than the rain. He raised a hand to his ear, tapping an earpiece. And then he started walking. Not running, walking. It was the confident, terrifying walk of a predator who knows the prey has nowhere to go. I backed away, bumping into a stack of plastic crates, the noise echoing like a gunshot in the alley. They weren't tracking me visually. They were tracking the iron key itself. Every time I used it, it must send up a flare on their radar, a GPS signal that punched through dimensions. I wasn't hiding. I was just lighting up a new dot on their map. Run, I told myself, legs shaking as the adrenaline dumped into my blood. I couldn't stay in the open. I needed a door, a lock, anything to get out of this trap. I spotted a service entrance to a karaoke bar, a heavy steel door covered in stickers and graffiti. Lunging for it, I fumbled in my pocket for the relic. The man in the gray coat was gaining ground, his pace quickening as he saw me move. I jammed the iron key into the lock, ignoring the way my hands trembled. I didn't think of a specific place this time. Fear scrambled my brain. I just thought of a way, anywhere but here. The lock clicked, a heavy mechanical sound that felt like salvation. I twisted the handle and fell through the doorway, not knowing if I was landing in a desert or a volcano, just praying the door would close before the shadow could follow. Stepping through the steel door wasn't an escape. It was a death sentence. My foot expected the solid concrete of a karaoke bar floor, but instead it found absolutely nothing. I pitched forward, gravity taking hold instantly, tumbling into a roaring white void that froze the scream in my throat. I didn't land on a floor. I slammed into a steep slope of ice and powder, rolling uncontrollably, the world spinning in a blur of gray sky and white terror. I clawed at the snow, my fingers burning from the cold. digging in my heels until I skidded to a halt on a narrow ledge. The Tokyo rain was gone, replaced by a blizzard that hit with the force of a freight train. Looking over the edge, the drop was endless, thousands of feet of jagged rock disappearing into the clouds. I wasn't in a city anymore. I was halfway up a mountain, maybe the Alps or the Himalayas, stranded at 12,000 feet in a windbreaker and sneakers. The cold was instantaneous and brutal, a physical weight that started crushing my chest immediately. My wet clothes from the Tokyo rain turned stiff and icy against my skin, sucking the heat out of my blood. "No, no, no," I stammered, scanning the whiteout for the door I had just come through. It was gone. The portal had closed, vanishing back into the ether, leaving me alone on a cliff face where the air was too thin to breathe. I had made the classic mistake. I panicked. I didn't visualize a destination, so the key sent me away, and away turned out to be the killing zone of a frozen peak. I checked my pocket, terrified the fall had dislodged the relic. It was still there, freezing cold against my leg. But a key is useless without a lock, and nature doesn't build doors. I was going to die here. Not in days, but in minutes. Hypothermia was already making my hands clumsy and my thoughts slow. Squinting through the stinging snow, I saw a shape about 50 yards up the ridge, a dark, unnatural square outline against the white. It looked like a metal box, maybe a weather station or a maintenance shed for a ski lift. I forced my legs to move, crawling on hands and knees up the slope, the wind trying to peel me off the mountain with every gust. "Just one lock," I whispered, my lips numb and blue. "Give me one lock." It was a race against my own failing body, dragging myself toward that tiny metal shack, praying it had a door handle, a padlock, anything that I could twist to get the hell out of the freezer and back to the world of the living. Reaching the metal structure felt like finishing a marathon with broken legs. My fingers were useless claws, numb and white, scraping against the corrugated steel wall of the shack as I pulled myself up. It wasn't a building, it was a weather station, a tiny box of sensors and batteries bolted to the rock, vibrating violently in the gale. The door was small, just a service hatch, but it had a handle. A glorious, rusted, iron handle. I grabbed it, but my grip slipped on the ice coating the metal. "Come on," I sobbed, the tears freezing instantly on my cheeks. I was fading, the black edges of unconsciousness creeping in to shut down the lights. If I passed out here, I would be a frozen statue by morning, just another warning sign for climbers. I slammed the iron key against the ice encasing the lock, chipping away the frost with frantic, clumsy strikes until the keyhole was exposed. Jamming the relic into the mechanism, it didn't turn. It was frozen solid. The magic of the key was fighting against the physics of negative 30 degrees. "Warm, warm, warm," I chanted, cupping my hands around the lock, blowing hot, desperate breaths onto the metal. I could feel the heat leaving my body, the last reserves of energy flowing out to thaw the steel. I didn't picture a bank vault or a city this time. My brain was too frozen for complex geography. I just pictured quiet, a place with no wind, no snow, just silence and heat. The key finally groaned, a sluggish, grinding resistance that felt like breaking bone, and then, click, the latch gave way. I didn't walk through, I fell through, tumbling headfirst out of the blizzard and landing hard on a plush oriental rug. The screaming wind vanished instantly, replaced by a silence so heavy it hurt my ears. I rolled onto my back, gasping for air that smelled of old paper, floor wax, and dust. I wasn't on a mountain. I was in a library. Massive wooden shelves towered over me, filled with leather-bound books, and soft golden light filtered through high windows. A few feet away, an elderly woman in a cardigan lowered her reading glasses, staring in horror at the man who had just fallen out of the janitor's closet, blue-lipped and shivering in a puddle of melting snow. "Sorry," I wheezed, my voice barely a whisper. "Wrong turn." I was alive, but as I looked at the security camera blinking in the corner, I knew the quiet wouldn't last. The warmth of the library was a trap, a soft blanket trying to lull me into a coma. Stumbling to my feet, my joints popping like dry twigs, I ignored the staring woman and the security guard jogging toward me from the reference section. "Sorry, art project," I mumbled, pushing past a cart of books and shoving through the heavy oak doors onto the street. It was Paris. I recognized the smell of baguettes and diesel fumes instantly, the Eiffel Tower glowing in the distance like an iron needle. But looking at my reflection in a shop window, I looked like a corpse, blue-skinned and dripping wet in a city of fashionable coats. I couldn't stay, but I had to know. The paranoia was eating a hole in my stomach. If they found my apartment, if they found me in Tokyo, did they find my sister in Jersey? I needed a phone, but using mine was suicide. A GPS beacon that would bring the tactical teams down on my head in seconds. I spotted a tourist, a guy in a "I Love Paris" shirt taking a selfie near a metro station. "Please," I said, snatching the phone from his hand before he could react, ignoring his shout of protest. "Emergency! 1 minute!" My fingers shook so hard I misdialed twice before hitting the contact for Sarah. I pressed the phone to my ear, listening to the ringtone, praying to hear her voice, praying she would just complain about her boss or the weather. It rang once, twice. Then the line clicked open. "Sarah?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "She can't come to the phone right now," a man's voice answered. It wasn't Sarah. It was calm, flat, and terrified me more than the blizzard. It was the man from Tokyo. "Sarah's sitting right here, though. She looks very confused about why a SWAT team is in her kitchen." The world stopped spinning. The noise of the Paris traffic faded into a dull buzz. "If you touch her," I snarled, gripping the stolen phone until the screen cracked under my thumb. "We don't want her," the voice cut in, smooth as glass. "We want the key. You have 12 hours. Bring it to the black site coordinates I am sending you now, or Sarah becomes a casualty of a gas leak." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, the rage boiling the cold out of my blood. They didn't want a chase anymore. They wanted a war. Staring at the glowing numbers on the shattered screen, the coordinates burned themselves into my memory like a brand. 37 degrees north, 116 degrees west. The middle of the Nevada desert. A place that doesn't exist on any civilian map. I dropped the stolen phone into a trash can, watching it disappear among the candy wrappers and cigarette butts. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a trade. My life, my freedom, and the most powerful object in history, all in exchange for a sister who thinks I'm still mopping floors for minimum wage. I didn't have a plan, I didn't have a weapon, and I certainly didn't have backup. All I had was a rusty piece of iron and a guilt heavy enough to crush a tank. "I'm coming," I whispered to the empty street, turning my back on the Eiffel Tower and the freedom I had stolen. Walking to the nearest metro entrance, the iron key felt different in my pocket now, cold and dead, like it knew it was going home to a cage. I found a maintenance closet near the turnstiles, the kind with a padlock that snaps open if you look at it wrong. Jamming the key into the cylinder, I didn't visualize a beach or a vault. I visualized the coordinates. I visualized the sand, the heat, and the fence. The lock clicked, a sound that felt like a gavel coming down in a courtroom. Turning the handle, the smell of ozone and dry sage hit me instantly, overpowering the stale metro air. I wasn't running away this time. I was walking straight into the lion's mouth. Stepping through the doorway, my boots crunched onto hard-packed dirt. The Paris closet door stood behind me for a second, a rectangle of darkness in the blinding sun, before slamming shut and vanishing into a shimmer of heat haze. I was standing on a ridge overlooking a valley of nothingness, except for a concrete block in the distance surrounded by razor wire. A black SUV was parked at the gate, waiting. A figure stood next to it, small in the vast landscape, wearing that same gray raincoat. I raised my hands slowly, the iron key clutched in my right fist, glinting in the merciless sun. I started walking down the hill. They had won. Or at least that is what I wanted them to think. The walk down the dusty slope felt like marching to a funeral, the heat radiating off the ground in waves that distorted the air like a mirage. Approaching the black SUV, I saw her, Sarah, sitting in the back seat, terrified, hands zip-tied, looking at me like I was a stranger she had never met. The man in the gray coat stood by the open door, his face completely blank, holding out a hand that didn't shake. "Smart choice," he said, his voice barely rising above the desert wind, dry as the sand around us. I didn't answer him. I just held up the iron relic, letting the sun catch the rust, showing him the prize he had chased across the globe. It felt heavy, not just physically, but with the crushing weight of everything I was about to lose. "Let her go," I demanded, stopping 10 feet away, my muscles coiled and ready to snap. He nodded to a guard, and the back door opened. Sarah stumbled out into the dirt, crying, looking from me to the soldiers with wide, panicked eyes. "Run," I mouthed to her, but she didn't move. She was frozen by the black barrels of the rifles pointed at her chest. The gray coat stepped forward, ignoring her completely, his eyes locked on the key with a hungry intensity. "The artifact," he commanded, wiggling his fingers impatiently. I tossed it. It spun through the air in a slow, agonizing arc, a piece of old iron that controlled the world, and landed in his palm with a heavy thud. He closed his fist around it, and for the first time, he smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that told me the deal was dead. "Secure them!" he barked, turning his back on me instantly. The soldiers didn't lower their weapons. They advanced. I lunged for Sarah, grabbing her arm just as the butt of a rifle slammed into my ribs, knocking the wind out of me with a sickening crunch. Ugh. They didn't let us go. Of course they didn't. Why leave witnesses when you can erase them? They dragged us toward the concrete bunker, the heavy steel doors sliding open to reveal a dark, yawning mouth waiting to swallow us whole. I looked back at the gray coat one last time. He was holding the key up to the sun, admiring it like a jewel. He had the power now, but he didn't know the rules. And as the darkness of the prison closed in, I realized that losing the key was the only way to get close enough to burn them down. Hitting the concrete floor of the cell knocked the remaining air from my lungs, the cold, hard surface welcoming me with a brutal thud. The heavy steel door slammed shut behind us, the magnetic locks engaging with a deafening clunk that echoed in the tiny, windowless box. Sarah huddled in the far corner, knees pulled tight to her chest, sobbing quietly into her hands, the sound tearing at my heart more than the rifle butt to the ribs had. "I'm sorry," I whispered, crawling slowly toward her, ignoring the sharp, hot stab of pain in my side. We were buried alive, trapped under a mountain of rock and government secrets, stripped of the one thing that gave us a fighting chance. The walls were smooth, seamless gray metal, humming with a low electric vibration that felt like a headache waiting to happen. There were no windows to break, no furniture to throw, just a stainless steel toilet and a camera blinking red in the ceiling, watching us rot in high definition. Sitting with my back against the cold steel wall, I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the overwhelming hopelessness. But in the darkness, I felt something strange, a faint, rhythmic pull in the center of my chest, like a compass needle swinging north. The key. It was close. They hadn't taken it far, probably to a lab just down the hall to dissect it and study the alloys. They thought it was just a tool, a piece of ancient technology to be reverse engineered, but they didn't understand the bond. It wasn't just metal, it was alive, and it was angry. It was calling to me, vibrating through the concrete. I looked at the door again, really looked at it. It didn't have a keyhole, just a keypad and a heavy electronic bolt. I couldn't open it with magic, but I knew something the gray coat didn't. The key wants to be used, and if they were trying to force it open without the right thought, without the visualization, the energy had to go somewhere violent. The floor suddenly jumped beneath us, a violent tremor that shook the dust from the ceiling vents like snow. Whoop, whoop. A siren began to wail in the corridor outside, a piercing, frantic sound that meant containment breach. "He tried to use it," I said, standing up, the pain in my ribs forgotten in the rush of adrenaline. The gray coat must have tried to open a door without the mental picture, and instead of a portal, he opened a tear in the building's power grid. The lights in our cell flickered and died, plunging us into total darkness. And then, click, the magnetic seal on the door disengaged as the power failed. The system had crashed. I pushed the heavy steel slab open, peeking into the chaotic hallway bathed in flashing red emergency lights. "Stay close," I told Sarah, grabbing her cold hand. The hunt wasn't over. It was just my turn to be the hunter. The corridor was a strobe-lit tunnel of panic, the red emergency lights spinning wildly against the brushed steel walls. Running past the open doors of other cells, I saw researchers and guards stumbling around in the dark, clutching their heads like they had just woken up from a coma. The power surge hadn't just killed the lights. It had scrambled the neural frequencies of everyone near the epicenter. "Don't look at them!" I yelled over the siren, pulling Sarah closer as we stepped over a pile of dropped rifles. We weren't escaping a prison anymore. We were navigating a disaster zone. The floor vibrated with a low, sickening hum that rattled my teeth, a magnetic resonance growing stronger with every step toward the north wing. The key wasn't just active, it was screaming. Turning the corner into Sector 4, the air suddenly tasted like ozone and burning hair. The gravity here felt wrong, lighter, like the heavy concrete floor was trying to float away into the ceiling. Debris, papers, coffee cups, broken glass, hung suspended in midair, frozen in a zero-gravity bubble that defied physics. "Stay low," I whispered, pushing Sarah down to a crawl. The walls ahead were scorched black, blasted outward as if a bomb had gone off inside the drywall. But there was no fire, only a crackling purple energy arcing between the exposed wires. The pull in my chest was now a physical hook, dragging me toward the double blast doors at the end of the hall. They hadn't just tried to open a door, they had tried to force open a wormhole without the coordinates, and the universe was fighting back. We reached the main lab, peering through the shattered observation window, and the sight stopped me cold. The room was a vortex. In the center, clamped into a massive titanium vise, sat the rusty iron key. It was glowing white-hot, spitting bolts of lightning that lashed out like whips, melting the expensive servers and reinforced glass like wax. And there, trapped in the corner behind a tipped-over desk, was the gray coat. He wasn't smug anymore. He was terrified, pinned down by the very power he tried to steal, shielding his face from the arcs of raw, dimensional energy. "Wait here," I told Sarah, ignoring her frantic grip on my arm. The machine was overloading. If I didn't pull that key out in the next 60 seconds, this whole bunker and half the desert was going to fold in on itself and vanish. I took a breath of the superheated air and stepped through the broken glass. Stepping into the vortex felt like walking into the heart of a tornado made of lightning. The air pressure was crushing, popping my ears with a wet click, while the ozone smell burned the inside of my nose like acid. Debris from the shattered lab equipment, glass shards, twisted metal, burning paper, orbited the central vise in a violent, chaotic ring, shielding the key like a deadly hurricane. "Don't touch it!" the gray coat screamed from his hiding spot, his voice thin and terrified against the roar of the energy storm. I ignored him, ducking under a flying heavy steel monitor that smashed into the wall behind me. He saw a weapon overloading, but I saw a terrified animal lashed to a table, biting at anything that came close. The key wasn't trying to blow up the world, it was trying to break free. Pushing forward was a nightmare, the magnetic waves hitting my chest like physical punches, forcing me to lean at a 45-degree angle just to stay upright. Every hair on my body stood straight up, static electricity snapping painfully against my skin. Reaching the titanium clamp, the heat was unbearable, blistering my face even from 3 feet away. The key was vibrating so fast it looked like a blur, a white-hot ghost of the rusty iron relic I knew. "Stop it!" I shouted at the metal, not knowing if I was talking to the machine or the artifact. I didn't have a code to shut it down. I only had my hand. I reached out, forcing my fingers through the arcs of purple lightning, smelling my own sleeve catch fire. My palm made contact with the iron, and the world turned white. It didn't burn me like fire. It froze me, a jolt of absolute zero that shot straight up my arm and slammed into my heart. But then the chaos broke. The lightning vanished instantly, sucked back into the metal like a reverse explosion. The vise shattered, the titanium crumbling into dust, and the key dropped into my hand, heavy, cool, and silent. The storm was over. The gravity returned to normal, dropping the floating debris to the floor with a deafening crash. Standing there, amidst the ruin, smoke rising from my jacket, I looked at the gray coat. He was staring at me with wide, horrified eyes, realizing that the prisoner was now the warden. I squeezed the key tight. "Time to go," I whispered. The gray coat scrambled backward across the debris-strewn floor, his hand fumbling for the sidearm dropped near the shattered desk. But he was too slow and too terrified to aim. Standing over him with the cooling iron relic in my fist, I had the power to send him into the heart of a volcano or the bottom of the Mariana Trench with a single turn of my wrist. But killing him wouldn't buy us time. It would just bring more of them. "Don't follow us," I warned, my voice raspy from the smoke, backing out of the ruined lab toward the shattered glass of the observation window. Sarah was waiting in the hallway, her face pale and streaked with soot. But she was alive, and she was moving. Grabbing her hand, we sprinted down the corridor, the red emergency lights painting the walls in flashes of bloody crimson. The bunker was waking up, the sound of heavy boots echoing from the stairwell at the far end of the sector. We didn't have minutes. We had seconds before the tactical teams boxed us in for good. We needed a door, any door with a physical lock. But this was a high-tech prison designed to keep people in, not let them out. The cell doors were magnetic, the blast doors were hydraulic, and none of them had a simple keyhole for the iron relic to bite into. "There!" Sarah shouted, pointing to a gray metal hatch labeled Maintenance Access B3 halfway down the hall. It was old, a leftover from the original Cold War structure, and it had a rusted manual padlock hanging from the hasp. I slid to a halt in front of it, my hands shaking as I jammed the anywhere key into the frozen tumblers. The sounds of shouting were getting closer. "Target acquired!" echoing off the concrete walls just 50 feet away. I didn't think of a map coordinate this time. I didn't think of a city. I closed my eyes and pictured the smell of pine needles, the sound of rain, and the feeling of being completely, utterly alone. The heavy padlock clicked open with a sound like a gunshot, falling to the floor with a metallic clang. I yanked the handle, swinging the heavy maintenance door outward. Instead of revealing a closet full of mops, the doorway opened into a wall of green mist and towering trees. The cool, damp air of a deep forest rushed into the burning hallway, smelling of wet earth and freedom. "Go!" I yelled, shoving Sarah through the portal before diving in after her. We landed on a bed of soft moss and pine cones, the silence of the woods instantly swallowing the chaos of the bunker. Behind us, the freestanding doorframe, which looked like a shimmering heat haze between two oak trees, snapped shut and vanished, severing the link to the desert prison. We were thousands of miles away, hidden in the deep wilderness, ghosts once again. The silence of the forest was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of rain against the tin roof of the abandoned ranger station we had claimed as our fortress. It had been 2 weeks since we fell through that maintenance door. 2 weeks of jumping at shadows and sleeping in shifts. But the tactical teams never came. We were deep in the Cascade Mountains, miles away from the nearest cell tower or paved road, hidden under a canopy of green that blocked out the satellites and the surveillance drones. Sitting by the wood stove, watching the flames lick at the dry cedar logs, I turned the iron key over in my fingers. It wasn't glowing anymore. It was cold, dormant, just a rusty piece of junk that looked like it belonged in a trash heap. Yet it was the only reason we were breathing. The adrenaline of the chase had faded, replaced by a dull, aching exhaustion that settled deep in my bones. We weren't prisoners in a government bunker, but we were exiles in our own country, ghosts who had to die so we could keep living. Sarah sat across from me, wrapped in 3 wool blankets, staring into the fire with eyes that had seen too much. She hadn't asked to be part of a heist. She hadn't asked to be kidnapped by men in gray coats. But she carried the burden of my secrets now. "We can't stay here forever," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind howling outside. She was right, of course. Eventually, the food would run out. The winter would roll in with snow deep enough to bury the cabin, and we would have to move. But moving meant using the key, and using the key meant lighting up the radar again. "We aren't going back," I told her, tossing a piece of bark into the fire. "We aren't going to New York. We aren't going to London. We have to go somewhere they can't follow, somewhere where the maps are blank." The map on the wall was faded, showing logging roads from the 1980s. But it represented our new reality. We were off the grid. The hardest part wasn't the cold or the hunger. It was the knowledge of what I had in my pocket. It is a terrible thing to hold the power of a god in the hands of a man who just wants to sleep. Every time I looked at a locked door, even the simple latch on the pantry, I felt the itch, the temptation to twist the iron and step through to a beach in Fiji or a penthouse in Dubai. It would be so easy. Just one turn, one thought, and the cold would be gone. But I looked at Sarah, shivering and safe, and I knew the cost. Freedom wasn't about going anywhere you wanted. It was about staying in the one place where they couldn't hurt you. I stood up, walking to the heavy floorboards in the corner of the room, and pried one loose with the edge of a knife. Beneath it was a small, dark hollow filled with dust and spider webs. I wasn't going to destroy the key. I couldn't, not after everything. But I was going to bury it. For now. Hammering the final rusted nail into the warped cedar floorboard felt like sealing a coffin, the heavy thud echoing through the small cabin like a judge's gavel ending a sentence. The iron relic was gone, buried beneath 6 inches of dust, timber, and the secrets of 100 years, sleeping in the dark where it couldn't tempt me. Standing up and dusting the dirt from my knees, the silence of the room felt deafening, a stark contrast to the roar of the teleportation vortex or the screaming sirens of the chase. My hand instinctively went to my pocket, searching for the cold, heavy weight that had been there for weeks. But my fingers found only denim and lint. It was a phantom limb sensation, a terrifying ache that whispered I was naked, vulnerable, and just a normal man again. Being a god is addictive, and the withdrawal hit me harder than the mountain cold, making my hands shake as I walked to the frosted window. The power to go anywhere in the universe was just 3 feet away, under a plank of wood, yet it might as well have been on the moon. Sarah was sleeping on the cot in the corner, her breathing steady and deep for the first time since Paris. She didn't know I had buried it. She thought I still carried it like a weapon. But she didn't need to know the truth. Peace is a fragile thing, built on lies and hidden things. Outside, the first snow of the season was beginning to fall. Big, heavy flakes drifting down to cover our tracks, turning the world into a blank, white sheet. We were ghosts now, erased from the databases, deleted from the grid, living in the spaces between the maps where the satellites don't look. The gray coat and his army were probably tearing apart London or Tokyo right now, chasing energy signatures that would never appear again. Let them hunt. Let them burn the world down, looking for a door that is already closed. We had the fire. We had the shelter. And for the first time in my life, I didn't want to be anywhere else. I walked to the door, the real door, the one with hinges and a simple, non-magical deadbolt, and pushed it open. The cold air rushed in, biting and clean, smelling of pine needles and coming winter. It wasn't a beach in the Maldives. It wasn't a bank vault filled with gold. It was just a porch in the middle of nowhere, overlooking a valley of dark trees and gray sky. It was boring. It was quiet. And it was absolutely beautiful. I looked back at the loose floorboard one last time, knowing that the temptation would never truly leave, knowing that the key would always be there, waiting for a desperate day or a greedy thought. But not today. I stepped out into the snow, letting the door click shut behind me. The lock engaged with a simple mechanical sound. I was finally home.